bank immediately sells that mortgage. Minutes after Mr. and Mrs. Smith have signed it, that bank sells it to the Federal Reserve and gets money for it. You know who owns the mortgage? You know who the real lender is for 1/3 of all American houses? It's the government. The government is the creditor. The government is pumping the money in that makes it possible for people to borrow, and by doing that drops the interest rate so that people can afford the very possibility of buying a home. We don't have a private housing economy in this country. We have a publicly funded one. There's a massive program of welfare for homeowners. Let me give you a second example. The Federal Reserve is now buying corporate bonds by the billions. What does that mean? Any company in America that's having a problem, it produced something that nobody wants. Its technology is outmoded. Its workers are angry and demanding higher wages. How does it solve this problem? The quickest, easiest, cheapest way right now is to go to the Federal Reserve, go to the government, borrow limitless amounts of money at an interest rate barely above zero. Cheap, free, or nearly free money. And every corporation in the country is doing it. You know who's lending them the money? The Federal Reserve, the government. So here's a simple way to understand it. The private capitalist center of this economy is now receiving government welfare. It's receiving way more welfare than a single mom with 3 kids ever got. And that's why you don't hear the usual conservative noise against welfare folks, because the welfare now is the capitalist system, the welfare recipient. It's all on government life support, and that's another sign of a system falling apart.
This is listener-sponsored WBAI in New York. You're listening to Professor Rick Wolff. We're talking about his new book. His new book is called The Sickness in the System. It's called The Sickness in the System, and then there's a colon. What's the rest of the title, Professor?
The rest of the title is When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself.
And the number to call to become a member of WBAI is 516-620-3602. Thank you, those of you who are calling in. And we're going to take some listener phone calls right now to, if you want to speak to Professor Wolff. And I know we do have some callers waiting. So WBAI, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Asa. I'm from Harlem.
Oh, hi.
And
how are you doing?
2 questions I would like to ask Professor Wolff. First of all, it's an honor and pleasure to actually address the question to him. And the question is, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are actually 2 classes fighting each other, and to refine it more, if you look at a coin, but it's like when we were children, we would say heads you win and tails you lose. No matter which party you go for, you're going to lose. That's the problem. The second question is, the Alexander Cortez and Bernie Sanders, do they really believe that change is going to come in this country through parliamentary change, or it's going to be an armed struggle? Now, I'm going to hang up, and hopefully I made my question or commentary something that the professor can pick off and expound on. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for calling in, Asa. Professor.
Yes, let me respond in 2 parts to the question, and to thank Assad for his kind words about my work. I appreciate them enormously, and I don't want in any way, by jumping into the substance of his question, not to acknowledge his kind words. Okay, having said that, I could not agree more. I think that the Republican and Democratic parties are now, and probably have been for quite a while, people gathered together who support the reproduction of capitalism. That's what they do. They don't agree exactly on how to do it, on exactly what kind of capitalism they want to see established. The Republicans are generally more pro-business, and they're more comfortable with a harsher kind of capitalism, and the Democrats are a little bit interested in a softer kind, at least domestically. They are almost identical when it comes to foreign policies. So yes, these are parties that have long ago become dependent on the donations of corporations and the rich. Most big corporations, if you look closely, give money to both parties. They're covering their bets. They know that it really doesn't matter for them which party gets in. As long as they've given money to both of them, they will have their interests served. What that means is that the mass of people don't have a political party, that those who are victims of capitalism have no place to go to express the fact that they would like to be served by a system that was different, that wasn't geared to reproducing capitalism, to saving the capitalist first and let everybody else, struggle on their own. What we don't have in the United States are political parties that are committed to a different system, where you could vote for them and get a different system that gave working people the priority rather than capitalists, that gave the solution of problems like systemic racism, the misogyny we suffer from in this country, that make those the priority problems and really address them for the first time, guarantee people the income, the job, the education that would make it possible for us to really have equality and freedom. We need a political party that does that. I don't see it being the Democrats or the Republicans. They don't look willing to go in that direction. There are some Democrats who do. So maybe the way it'll happen in this country, which is what happened in other countries, is that a new political party emerges, the old Democratic Party splits, and part of it joins with the new one, and then you have a real alternative. If I could be a little bit, critical of, in a funny kind of way, I'd try it this way. I've always found it amazing that Americans talk a lot about wanting freedom of choice. When you go to the supermarket, you want 27 kinds of breakfast cereal that you can choose among, or 26 kinds of toothpaste in the drugstore that you can choose among. You want choice. And yet, when it comes to political parties, you seem to be a country happy with two that are barely identifiable as different. What happened to the desire for freedom of choice? Why not have a political system that lets political parties proliferate, let there be bunches of them, and let them be really struggling with one another to win our votes by advocating for the kinds of changes more and more Americans know they need. On the last point, violence. I'm not in favor of violence. I want the change to be peaceful, and that's what I would prefer. But I am also not naive. I don't see the existing system in this country being willing peacefully to go away, to change, to understand that its time is over. Look at the reaction of Mr. Trump and the GOP to perfectly peaceful protesters. It's full of threats of violence, full of threats that the police will be supported in ways that are violent. My fear is that the system won't go quietly. It will choose to be violent, and I don't want to be victimized by having not thought about that and therefore leave the field to them. It's self-defense, but it has to be understood as part of what this system wants to do as it faces the decline that it keeps wanting to pretend it's not in the middle of.
Mm-hmm. 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 You're listening to Professor Rick Wolff. He's the author most recently of The Sickness is the System. The book is divided into 50 commentaries. They are reminders of how the U.S. political economy has failed us so miserably and exacerbated the COVID-19 crisis. Lectures and writings by the professor. He's host of Economic Update here on WBAI every Wednesday at 6:30 following the WBAI WBAI Evening News. Thank you to Jean from New York for becoming a WBAI member, for pledging $100 to receive this new book, hot off the presses, with, do we still say hot off the press? I guess we still do, right?
Yes. Yes, we do.
That hasn't changed, because there are people who are reading in print books that you can handle. You can turn the page, and here's an actual book. So, Jean, thank you so much for pledging $100 to WBAI to receive Professor Wolf's book, and also a recent lecture by the professor. And also, Nico, thank you so much also for now pledging support and offering $100, a tax-deductible contribution to WBAI to receive the professor's book and also a recent lecture. The number to call is 516-620-3602. That's the number to call to ask for Professor Wolf's book, The Sickness is the System. 516-620-3602. We're going to take some more calls, but I'm looking for a few more people to call in and to pledge support and to show your support for the professor. It's so wonderful to have you on the air with us, Rick, so that you can take calls. Can we have some more people calling in and becoming listener sponsors? 516-620-3602 is the number to call. You receive a copy of this book, this wonderful new book by the professor, talking about the system, the economic system, and what it has, the havoc that it has caused to the economy and also in people's lives because of the way that this pandemic was handled, and how these economic crises are happening every 4 to 7 years, and one can expect them, and it has just gotten worse and worse over time, and what can be done. So it's not just the problems that are outlined, but also what kind of solutions we can look at. 516-620-3602 is the number to call. Can we see some more people calling in now and becoming members of WBAI? I see there are some people calling and pledging right now. 516-620-3602 is the number to call. And we are going to take another listener phone call here at 212-209-2877. And Michael, we'll go to the next call, please. WBAI, you're on the air. Hello.
Yes, Jim from Brooklyn.
Hey, Jim.
Thank you, Professor. It's an honor to speak with you. I wonder if you could reconcile two conflicting arguments which I hear from people on the right and the left. I hear people on the right saying that all of these governments that claim to be socialist or even more radical have ended with murder and failure, and even they say today that Venezuela is now being investigated for the government top-down extrajudicial killings. But yet I hear from the left that this is not true, that our system is the bad one, in view of the fact that we have these swarms of thousands upon thousands of Americans who are leaving the country in droves, going to other countries. How can we resolve these arguments versus millions slaughtered by communism and socialism, and yet the leftists say that look at all the Americans who are sworn to leave this nation. How can we reconcile that? Can you explain that?
Thank you for your question, Jim. Let's let the professor answer. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll be glad to answer it. It has been a staple of anti-left ideological struggle to refer to cases of violence that happened under Stalin, particularly in the Soviet Union, and that had happened in a number of other socialist and communist-led countries. There have been violent struggles in those countries. There's no question about it. But the notion that there's somehow the socialists are specifically responsible for this, I find extraordinary, and let me briefly explain. In the Soviet Union, let's start with that one, because the Stalin situation there is the one most often pointed to, so I'll focus on that. The Russians made a revolution relatively peacefully in 1917. There was violence, but it was very much on both sides. It was a terrible struggle, the revolution, and there was a civil war inside Russia between the Red Army and the White Army. But in case you're not familiar with it, there were 4 countries outside the Soviet Union who sent military forces to Russia, to the Soviet Union, to fight alongside the White Army against the Red Army, to overthrow the new revolutionary government. Those 4 countries were France, Britain, Japan, and the United States. The United States sent roughly 10,000 troops, landed in Russia, and fought against the new revolution. They killed a lot of people in the course of that civil war. But the notion that somehow the socialists are the ones who did the violence is a peculiar rewriting of history. In the 10 to 20 years after that, the early years of the Soviet Union, for a long time, the United States, for example, didn't recognize the Soviet Union, fought against it, produced every kind of effort to undo it, much as the United States has done that with Cuba, much as the United States waged a war against Vietnam. The pressures on socialists, the effort to destroy them over the last 100 years, has led to all kinds of wars and struggles inside these countries and internationally. But to decide somehow that in all of that violence, the socialists get the blame, they caused it, strikes me as really bizarre turning of history around.
Quickly, we have like about a minute.
Okay. The 2 most cataclysmic losses of life in the last century were World War I and World War II. Those were wars that killed more people than Mr. Stalin ever managed. And they were wars by and among capitalist countries fighting over markets and raw materials and terrorism.